Welcome to this session entitled Prospects for the 2016 Nuclear Security Summit and Beyond. By way of introduction, my name is Matthew Cottee. I'm a research associate at the IISS. Not obviously personally involved in the official summit discussions, but watching closely from the periphery, and I cleverly chose this as a topic of a PhD. And as one of the organisers, I'd just like to thank you all for coming and for being here. A couple of housekeeping points. A reminder that everything is on the record. Full transcripts will be available on the IISS website shortly after the conclusion of the event. And when putting together this year's agenda, we knew that the Nuclear Security Summit process was certainly topical, but participant interest in this particular session was incredibly high, which suggests that despite some claims of fatigue, nuclear security certainly remains an issue of concern heading into 2016. So as we move towards the final summit, our three speakers will provide an overview of what has worked, where improvements may be required, and how interest can be sustained to provide a lasting legacy. And I'm pleased to say that the calibre of speakers is as high as the interest in this particular session. And it's a great privilege that we are joined by, starting on my far left, Assistant Secretary of State for International Security and Non-Proliferation, Countryman, Ambassador Werner Bauwens, Deputy Director General for Multilateral Affairs at the Belgian MFA and Sherpa to the NSS process. And providing an NGO perspective on my right-hand side is Elena, Sokova, Deputy Director for the Centre for Non-Proliferation Studies in Monterey. And if you require any further biographical information, then I'm instructed to direct you towards our wonderful app. So without further ado, I give the floor to Countryman. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Matt. In looking ahead to next year's final Nuclear Security Summit, it's valuable first to recall what we've done, what we've accomplished. Remember that the impetus for the summit process came from President Obama's speech in Prague in the spring of 2009, and it was one of several elements he mentioned as essential, one of the practical steps toward the security of a world without nuclear weapons. The threat he outlined, the risk that a terrorist organization could acquire sufficient nuclear material to make an improvised nuclear device, has not gone away. But at the same time, we can celebrate the fact that the possibility of acquisition of such material by any individual or terrorist organization is greatly reduced. Since the process began with the first summit in 2010, the number of countries and facilities who have highly enriched uranium or plutonium on their territory has decreased. More than a dozen countries have eliminated any such holding. Security approaches at sites that contain fissile material or have been greatly enhanced. States are paying far greater attention to security of transport of fissile materials. The number of countries that have prepared counter-nuclear smuggling plans and implemented them has grown rapidly. Overall, the global nuclear security architecture is stronger. We've significantly strengthened bilateral, regional, and international cooperation on nuclear security. And some of the items that are, or the aspects of the summit process that are often criticized were, in fact, crucial to its success. The fact that it was limited participation, not every country of the world, and not under a United Nations umbrella, and not under a complex consensus process. And second, that the agenda has been strongly limited to the actual question of nuclear security. It has, of course, been tempting for participants to tie the summit process to every other issue in the world, including non-proliferation and disarmament and civil nuclear cooperation. But it only succeeded in being as strong as it has because it maintained discipline on a specific subject on which progress was truly possible. Now, President Obama looks forward to hosting the fourth and final Nuclear Security Summit in Washington on March 31st and April 1st. We are eager, of course, that the good work of the summit process continues beyond the Washington Summit, and the work of the Sherpas and the discussion at the summit will be precisely to that end. We have involved over the last couple of years the international community and especially international organizations and 5 specific organizations that will carry this process forward, each within their sphere of specialty and each with an enhanced mission to provide global nuclear security. These are, of course, the International Atomic Energy Agency, the Global Initiative to Combat Nuclear Terrorism, the United Nations, the Global Partnership Against the Spread of Weapons and Materials of Mass Destruction, and Interpol. Each will have an action plan that will be reflected in the final communique of the summit, and we believe that each of these organizations is prepared to carry forward this vital mission. At the same time, we expect, in the tradition of the first 3 summits, national gift baskets, that is, specific commitments that countries are bringing, specific steps that they will take to further enhance nuclear security. So that's it in a nutshell. Thank you for this opportunity, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Tom. Short and sweet and to the point. Ambassador Bauwens.
Thank you. At the risk of being somewhat less sweet and a bit longer. It's my bad habit, Tom. You know that.
Very sweet.
Thank you. Let me maybe start with 2 initial broader comments. One, it should be obvious to all, but it's always good to repeat. Enhancing nuclear security is an ongoing and is always going to be an ongoing and a never-ending job. The challenges and as well as the actors evolve over time. I can give you one example. Who would have thought that, a couple of years ago within the Nuclear Security Summit environment, we would start talking about what was then framed as the nexus between safety and security. Because what happened, imagine Fukushima. And the initial question was more like, when we launched the process back in 2009, the what-if question. What if terrorists, like September 11, would have had nuclear materials in their hands rather than a plane? The question at the time of Fukushima was, on what if, because of problems with safety, bad actors would abuse that situation. So all of a sudden, the whole challenge became much more complex, and an issue that we have been trying, 200% really trying to get off the summit agenda, safety, through the back door, sort of creeped in. So that's what I just give you this one example to say that situations do change, and situations do have an impact on how you run your summit and your objective. There is no one forever sort of objective. The objective will always be adapting to the situation. There's not one fit all either, so we must be very targeted at the same time. There are issues evolving also in the economic and the industrial field, as well as in the scientific community with regard to the hard stuff that we are talking about. Issues like conversion of HU are highly technical issues, and the production of medical isotopes has a huge industrial, economic, financial side as well. You can't just talk about these issues from a purely security point of view. There's a lot of ramifications in the real world, well beyond all of the wisdom gathered in this room. And that is why it's so important also to keep touch with and keep pace with industry on most of these issues as well. And industry is changing by nature. Industry is always evolving, and knowledge is evolving, and science is evolving. So it's this story about, dealing with nuclear security is never going to end. My second point at the start is, and again, I hear that from Tom, and I know it's a very popular expression, the global nuclear security architecture or the international nuclear security architecture. There are hundreds of questions that you can raise about what exactly is meant by that. People do tend to forget that when it comes to nuclear security, national responsibility is at the core of everything. It's too easy to say that the world, the global community, is going to take care of the issue. No, you, as a national responsible government, have to deal with it. And it depends on what type of material you have on your soil, what type of nuclear facilities you have on your territory. So again, that varies very much. No one fit for all again. So national responsibility as the core, but, Tom, you're right, the challenge indeed is global. So there is a need, and that is what attracted us so much in President Obama's initiative back in 2009. There is indeed a need to build bridges at the international level and to invest in international norm setting, and the role of international organizations has to be fully respected in this as well, be it the IAEA or, for that matter as well, the United Nations. So based on those two very general premises, just for you to keep that in mind, a never-ending story, one, and two, it's basically all about national responsibility and what we can do together better. The notion of symmetry. Now, the presence of heads of state or head of government is not and cannot be an end in itself. We have, within the group of Sherpas for the last maybe 12, 15 months, since the end of the previous summit in The Hague, we've been having discussions about, do we need more summits? It's all about a format. No, the real question is, do we look at the presence of heads of state and of government as a means to get things done? It's about achieving objectives. It's not about the decorum and the presence of your leaders, but where do they make a difference, their involvement? Where do you get results? And I must admit, I may have been a bit critical from the outset. I'm one of the elderly, not necessarily the wise men. Back in 2009, 2010, what is this going to bring? Now, you'd be surprised. I can't talk, and I will not talk for others. I will talk for myself, for my country. But raising political awareness is one thing. Two, move the issues up on your political agenda. Three, add to what is called generally mainstreaming nuclear security as part of your overall security concerns and agenda. And when you say mainstreaming, the essence, of course, is to try to maintain also coherence. For performance, for those American colleagues in the room who have as long a diplomatic life as I have, I used to work with Max Kampelman, your side, in the CSC in the old days, the end of the Cold War. Performance was the key word. Having a nice diplomatic gathering is one thing. Having a concluding document is another thing. But getting things done, getting people out of the prisons in some of the regimes that were sitting around the table, that was what mattered. That is what we call performance. One could easily say today deliverables. It's a more modern term. What are the deliverables our side? Things, I'm very open with you. I know I'm supposed to speak on the record, and I do, upon the condition, of course, that you accept that I speak in my personal capacity. Now, what have we achieved? What have we done? Things that we would never have done without the summit dimension. That is a true added value. Well, since 2010, we give annually $300,000 to the Nuclear Security Fund of the IAEA. At times of deep economic financial crisis, believe me, it's not easy to get this done. And when you're preparing for a summit meeting and you get to the highest level of your government, and you say, that would be a nice gesture when people ask, what is Belgium contributing to the process? Money. And with money, indeed, you can get things done, certainly at the level of the agency, where money is lacking. It's a voluntary fund. 2, all of the domestic regulations following out of the ratification of the Convention on Physical Protection of Nuclear Materials as amended. Speed up your process. That is what we've done. Now, it's not the foreign ministry folks like myself who are involved in that. They're the true experts. And they're always protecting their domain. It's not easy for nuclear people at the administration level to accept what we tell them to do. But because of the summit, they understood the urgency. And things were done in time. 3, as you may know, Belgium being one of the leading countries in the world,
Here.
on football at least, we do have highly enriched uranium on our soil and separated plutonium. To get rid of that stuff whenever and wherever we don't need it or no longer need it, through the summit mechanisms, we've arranged with the country of my good friend here to repatriate certain of that stuff. Again, more easily said than done. It's a horribly complex and expensive issue. It's done. Not all of it. And there I make the link, of course, with what I said at the beginning, national responsibility, but also the evolving situation, the real world outside, including what is happening in industry. If you still need it for research reactors, then what's happening is you try to accommodate. If you still need it for the production of your medical isotopes, today in Belgium no longer the case. When we started that process back in 2010, that was still the case. So we've moved on there, mostly thanks also to the process that we've joined back in 2010. Except the International Physical Protection Advisory Services, people in the room know that as IISS missions from the agency. Again, in certain environments, in the nuclear regulatory bodies, there may be a bit of a reluctance to accept that sort of, it's not control, but there's, an element of verification, if you wish, soft. Well, we've pushed it through their throat. Don't quote me on that, please.
Too late.
And we had, back in 2014, the first IISS mission to Belgium. And we're learning lessons from that. It actually proved to be extremely instructive. We can only encourage every single country represented in the room who wouldn't have done it yet to go through exactly the same motions. It's extremely helpful. Don't be afraid of it. So repatriation I've covered. Conversion is another one of those technical, industrial linked issues that you have to look at. We're making progress. Also with regard to the research reactor. So things are being done, and as I said a couple of minutes ago, they are being done in particular because we are committed in this Nuclear Security Summit process to a sort of expectation to deliver. So deliverables are key to success, and in that regard, the summit process up till today has been successful. Don't forget either that, again, on industry and science, nuclear security summits have provided us with a number of opportunities to do outreach with science and industry. They're always in the margins of the summits, what is called either scientific summit meetings or their nuclear industry summit meetings occurring as well. So in terms of networking, extremely valuable. So the Nuclear Security Summit process has been productive, has been useful. I would even go a little bit further. It has been a crucial phase in an ongoing process of international response to counter the threat of nuclear terrorism. That sounds like an official line, and it is. A bit less official now. Where Are we hitting the ceiling? You know me, Tom. Things need to be said. The first issue, membership. It is becoming problematic. We started 47, we're 53 today, plus 4 international organizations, including the EU. If I may say so, the process of recruitment has been maybe not entirely transparent. That's a euphemism. Okay, I mean, it's your show. You invite to Washington whoever you want. But there is an issue about this. Some people feel slightly uncomfortable. Some people feel left out. And indeed, some people are asking themselves the question, and why the hell are they in and not us? Because we are actually much more relevant to the issue than some that are within the summit group. So I believe we're reaching a stage where the issue of membership, of, well, if you wish, I know it's a dirty word for some, universality, is becoming an issue. Also, the summit illustrates the complexity of what I call variable geometry. You've mentioned that, Tom. We have various work plans. We're working now for the 2016 Washington Summit, referring to 5 organizations, UN, IEA, Interpol, Global Initiative, and Global Partnership. Variable geometry, because even within the group of 53, not all are members of each and every of those 5 subgroupings. And so there are questions being asked, and I believe rightly so, by some who do not belong to one or two of these, to the others in the group of the summit. Now, why the hell are you bringing this issue up within this environment? Because actually we're not involved. And so the first result concretely is that, yes, we will end up with 5 separate sort of work plans valid for each of the 5 organizations. The risk of unraveling of common lines, I believe, is also something that we need to look into. We have a common platform. There's the Washington Work Plan, which I believe is the most concrete, the most valuable within the whole summit history since 2010, probably more than the communiques, much more concrete, action-oriented. But then we have gift baskets. Within the broad coalition of the willing, of the 53 of the summit, you have subgroupings, coalitions of the willing and maybe coalitions of a bit less willing, to deal with a variety of issues. Can be information security, can be radioactive sources, can be maritime transport security and stuff like that. The problem, the challenge as I see it, is that the common lines we have been able to develop from the outset are slowly unraveling, at the risk of certain things becoming, even if we don't care enough, contradictory. So we're hitting a ceiling there. 3, HEU minimization. We've done a lot since the beginning of the summit in promoting that notion, which is horribly complex. And we don't have the time here to go into all of the details, but this really is at the heart of the whole process. How much further can we go within the summit context? The issue may be there that we need to take it up at another level, because other countries are involved as well who are not in the summit environment. And so the issue then becomes one of a global level playing field. Why would we Belgians tie our hands? We may be politically willing and right to do it, but the question still needs to be put. Whereas others, because they're not in the summit environment, are left loose and can do whatever they like. So what type of format, what type of frame would we need to deal with this issue, which again is, I repeat myself, is at the heart of the whole process of securing nuclear materials. It's minimization of HEU. My 4th issue, where I see us hitting the ceiling is about the type of materials that we're looking at very concretely. Civil, military, nuclear materials. That is in the Washington communique. Yes, military as well. No exception made. We have got India, Pakistan, Israel around the table. And of course they need to be. But can we take this any further within the summit environment? The distinction between fissile material and other radioactive materials. An issue like, high-activity sealed radioactive sources. Can you really believe that you can find an adequate solution within a limited environment? Limited, I mean, by number of states involved. If you're dealing with an issue like that, which we are convinced actually in Belgium is very pertinent from the perspective of countering nuclear terrorism. If it is pertinent, we believe it is most logical to talk about this issue at a global, all-inclusive level. And lastly, there's the unavoidable summit fatigue or summit overkill. I've done 4 summits with 4 different Belgian leaders. But it's a bit the atmosphere like in tourism. I've seen it, I've done it. The drive gets out. It's normal, it's not a criticism. These things do happen. It's just in my marriage that I keep the drive, fortunately, for 35 years. So, yeah, she may disagree with me, but there's this summit fatigue. And so, conclusion, I need time to wrap up. I told you I would be longer than you. I keep my promises. So the IAA is a central forum we see as the most logical sort of way forward, with political backup at the UN level, if needed. Talking about the UN, we had Obama initiative to have a nuclear security-related meeting at the Security Council a couple of years ago. It's perfectly possible. We don't need to invent machinery for that. It is there to be used. UN Security Council is the leading body when it comes to peace and security. But then we also have 1540 implementation, which can be raised at the level of the Security Council. Whenever there's an opportunity, we very much promote also the idea of the Security Council becoming much more engaged in preventive action. Publicity spot. 2 weeks ago, Belgium launched its campaign to become non-permanent member of the Security Council. Vote in 2018. Thank you, Tom, for voting for us. We'll be in 19 and 20 if everything goes well in the Security Council. Well, we may consider organizing something about nuclear security, if warranted. I mean, there's an opportunity there that can be used. But I believe central to all of this is going to be the IAEA. Regular meetings at ministerial level, like the one we had in 2013, perfectly possible that we can install some sort of mechanism with regard to that. Exchange information on HEU stocks. Why not look into that? We have information exchange mechanisms within the agency on separated plutonium. My country is part of that. I see some others in the room whose country is sitting in that as well. We're talking about highly delicate issues. Things are being done within the agency. So should we not try to look at what we can do on HEU as well? Budget. Maybe one day, when the summit process is over, our financial controller will reconsider our yearly voluntary contribution of $300,000. So why not try to turn that into becoming part of the regular budget of the agency, avoiding a situation whereby every time you're purely dependent on voluntary contributions through the Nuclear Security Fund. More complex, a code of conduct on radioactive sources. We have it. Why not try to turn that into a true legal instrument rather than a purely political declaration? And try to start up negotiations on putting that into a convention format. Further stimulate the IISS missions. Secure, of course, the information required, but there is, I believe, room for improvement there when it comes to transparency about what IISS has brought about at the national level. So in all, in conclusion, there may be 4 points I'd like to retain for the future and the role of the agency. 1, contribute to mainstreaming. 2, assure to a greater extent inclusiveness. 3, make sure we remain coherent while focusing on the specific realistic targets that we may have in separate fields. And you call that rightly so, Tom, discipline is needed. Don't start messing up things one with the other, or we'll never get things done. So focus on the real issues. And lastly, reinforce also the bridges with the NPT community on nuclear security. After all, nuclear security is part and parcel, in our view, of non-proliferation issues and part and parcel of the discussion about peaceful uses as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And finally, last but not least, Elena.
Thank you. I'm also probably going to make the same excuse as the previous speaker. We're kind of taking advantage that Tom kept to his 5 minutes. but I also was really helped by the previous speaker because some of the points he made are quite overlapping with some of my suggestions for this discussion. It is indeed a legacy moment for the Nuclear Security Summits as we approach the 2016 summit in Washington, D.C. And I wanted to kind of frame the discussion here around the 3 main kind of areas where the summit worked and made an impact. And the initial kind of goals of it, and what are the remaining challenges, what has not been achieved, and how we can move forward. First and foremost, the summit and the ideas that were put forward at the beginning really focused on making some practical impact and secure materials, facilities, remove where possible, concentrate. The second is to indeed raise the awareness and common understanding of the risks and threats of nuclear terrorism and the need to secure nuclear materials as facilities. And the third level is advanced nuclear security norms and mechanisms and the institutions. So where we are to date. I would say that the practical implementation has been really impressive. And we've heard from some of the numbers and figures from cleaning some countries, 12, 13, 15, 14 countries, depends on how you count, of highly enriched uranium and plutonium. Materials, 15 metric tons removed, at least as far as I understand, fresh and spent fuel. I would say one of the areas of the big achievements of the summit is that it really expedited that process. Many of these measures, from repatriation to conversion, have been on the agenda for a long time, but the speed was really something that the summit process brought about. Another area of achievement where I think the summit made a really big progress is the capacity building. In many countries, first of all, it brought on the agenda one of these issues. You cannot have lasting security and impact if you don't develop the relevant security personnel, enforce nuclear security culture, and many other things. And we saw the spread of nuclear security support centers, training initiatives in many countries. So The raising awareness, definitely. The summit raised the profile of the issues. It brought it really high on the political agenda within the countries. And I would say the fact that the summit process established that Sherpa and So-Sherpa mechanism and their regular meetings with the appointment of really high-level officials brought about this big change in the understanding. Even the countries that came to the summit really benefited a lot. I would say the countries that hosted summit just made it just a huge leap in terms of the understanding and sharing the agenda. I would say that when it comes to political commitments, some of the discussion that a previous speaker addressed, including the recognition of the role of the IAEA, the strengthening of the treaties and ratifications that came with that are extremely valuable and laudable. One of the mechanisms that was mentioned here is that new development of gift baskets when groups within the group of the willing coalition, the willing, was a really novel approach to solving some of these issues, at least moving the agenda forward. Because my understanding originally, when the first summit started, there was also a drive more for a consensus decisions, communicate. And towards the end, there was a recognition that some issues you can move forward, and maybe others will catch up. One of the 2014 summit decisions, particularly the so-called trilateral initiative or the 35 countries initiative, that said that we're going to make the IAEA standards our own standard. We're going to abide for them. We will do the capacity building and many other things, was really a way to demonstrate that some countries are willing and ready to do so, and others can catch up. But what I'm going to move next is more of a what are the remaining challenges or sometimes even missed opportunities that could have been addressed by the summit process. There is still time, but knowing how the summits works, probably not many of these issues will be resolved. I would say that when it comes to the HEU minimization and other issues, despite the very impressive progress, we haven't really, the summit process hasn't really dealt with some of the more difficult issues. We dealt with the research reactors conversion, some of the medical isotopes, but when it comes to pulse reactors, naval propulsion reactors, and many others, these haven't been touched at all within the Nuclear Security Summit. But even though it was admitted that military materials were mentioned in the communique, like the summit general messages really cover all civilian and military materials. But there hasn't been a single kind of concrete gift basket or just house gift or whatever you call it that related to some specific and practical steps related to military materials. And if you look, NTI just published yesterday or a day before a big report with recommendations how to deal with military materials, fissile materials. I would encourage you to look at that. And 73% of HEU and plutonium of weapons usable is indeed in military materials, and only 17 in the civilian applications. So we missed a big chunk of the issues here. I would say that the number of steps that maybe even the remaining time, some of the countries possessors of military materials could still make as their house gifts towards the summit or continue further down. A number of nuclear weapon states who are working on getting rid of their nuclear weapons and materials could declare some additional excess military materials from their dismantled nuclear weapons as excess and put towards downblending, put them under the IAEA safeguards, and many other opportunities that could demonstrate readiness to move these issues forward. On the awareness raising arena. I would say one of the key challenges ahead, as was already, I fully agree with you, is how do you translate what has been agreed and some of the common understandings to make this agenda universal, to have the even the IAEA membership. I worked for 4 years in Vienna and had a lot of communications there. When it comes to the parties who participated in the summit process, there is much more common agreement and understanding of these issues. But when you go back to the IAEA discussions on nuclear security, you can clearly see that the rest of the membership, maybe it's not really yet on board. And you have to do a lot of outreach to other countries and working with them how to find common ground. The other part of the IAEA challenge, I agree, that is probably one of the mechanisms that is central and would need to work in this area more. But in addition to everything else, the budget issue is very important, and it has to be part of a regular budget, as mentioned. And the office, even though it's elevated within the IAEA system, still struggles to have more resources, both human resources and financial resources to deal with some of these issues. I would also say that in terms of the IAEA, that kind of continuing tensions between the states' responsibility for nuclear security and nuclear security not really a mandatory part of the IAEA work, where many of the activities are voluntary. The situation in the safeguards and the nuclear security is different in this regard. Whatever the IAEA provides in terms of guidelines, standards, and missions, it's voluntary. There is no mechanism yet in the mandate that provides for more mandatory or legally binding obligations. I also agree about the fatigue and a little bit of even tiredness of dealing not only with the summit issues on a certain degree, but also overall with the nuclear security. It has been on the agenda for a long time, but yet again, it's some issues do have their own kind of life cycle, and you need to certainly think about how to keep that issue from being obviously with the change of the downgrading, even if you have these ministerial meetings at the IAEA, still keeping that on the agenda and high profile would be a really big challenge going forward. In terms of the political commitments and norms, I would really like to see the remaining time to be really bold on initiatives and innovations. One of the issues, I fully agree, that HEU minimization. I was hoping that the summit process would be a place where you can have a real kind of progress in that, in forming the global norm on the HEU minimization. Maybe some of the new ideas that have been put on the table by the non-governmental experts and now seems to have a little bit more track with individual governments, or at least regions, like highly enriched uranium free zones. Some regions are already naturally HEU free, and that could start the movement to translate it to other regions. The roadmaps with the real timelines, not a kind of a commitment on when possible, feasible, funding, permitting, and everything else. But we will make a commitment to do certain things and invest and put a timeline when some of these goals can be achieved. Yes, it would be really difficult to maintain the momentum, and not only from the point of view that the level of attention would be lowered, but as we know, usually the level of attention also quite often translates in terms of the funding capabilities. While we had that process and at really high level, and funding was corresponding, we've heard some of the numbers. How do we ensure that despite the drop in the attention, we will continue to have at least the same level of funding towards nuclear security? The other point was really already addressed, but I want to highlight it one more time. The Nuclear Security Summit process also engaged the industry and the academic, non-governmental scientific community, with the industry summit, separate summit, and the academic summits along the side of the main summit. How do you sustain that involvement between the governments and these other communities would be another big challenge. And the final point that I wanted to make is I agree that the discussion of nuclear security need to continue within other contexts, within the other mechanism. And frankly, when I looked at some of the missed opportunity, particularly in the HEU minimization, we now look at the HEU issues more in the framework of nuclear security and nuclear terrorism. But even if you look at the more historical perspective, we started with HEU minimization and conversion of reactors actually after the India peaceful nuclear test. And that work started as a non-proliferation, basically, proliferation concern effort. Now we look at it under the nuclear terrorism, nuclear security concerns. But if you look at the transparency issues on reporting on stocks, establishing good accounting, and control of materials, it will all come down at a certain point as also a question of nuclear disarmament, be it the fissile material cutoff treaty or accounting for fissile materials after the nuclear warheads are dismantled. So I do think that some of the issues that have been already raised at the 2014 Nuclear Security Summit in The Hague about putting nuclear security in the broader agenda of issues is very valid. You cannot really deal with the nuclear security as a, we had that attention, we focused on it, but it's time now to bring it to a broader discussion and address it both within the NPT, within the 1540 mandate, within the NSG, fissile material cutoff treaty discussions, and many others. I think I will end with that. I will already gotten notice that I'm overdue.
Thank you very much. So, despite the substantive presentations, I'm sure there are still a number of burning questions, and I have several already lined up. Just to remind you, please state your name and affiliation, and if you could wait for the microphone, that would be very good. And first on my list was Jacek Bilika.
Yes, thank you very much, and thank you for the presentations. Jacek Bilika, I'm the EU Sherpa for next year's Security Summit. And Werner mentioned about the possibility or the advisability of converting the Code of Conduct on radioactive sources into a legally binding instrument. So my question goes exactly in this direction. In the parallel summits, there have been ideas or even drafts of a nuclear security convention. I would love to hear the opinion from members of the panel about this proposal. Thank you.
So I'm going to collect a few questions at a time for the ease of timing. Second on my list was Angela Kane at the front here.
Center for Disarmament and Non-Proliferation, and you have listed a number of the challenges, and I thought it was an extremely exhaustive list, which gives us pause for thought. But the main question is, what are you going to do about mainstreaming, which is one of the main points that was mentioned, mainstreaming the achievements, but also building on those achievements of the Nuclear Security Summit process once it is passed on to institutions like the IEA, the United Nations, and others, and enlist the cooperation of those who were not part of the NSS, because I think that that's one of the main issues that is going to confront the building up of the positive engagement.
Thank you very much. Third on my list was Patricia Lewis.
Thanks, Patricia Lewis, Chatham House. She's building on that remark by Angela and what Elena also said. How much of this is really because there was a major focus at head of state level, an enormous amount of funding and energy, Sherpa process. How much of this is because of that kind of energy that was put into it? And what can we learn then from that energy and what we can do with other things? Can we do, for example, if we were to put that sort of energy into nuclear disarmament, would we see different results? You know, because I think what the NSS has done is marvelous, but I would love to have seen it put into, that sort of energy put into nuclear disarmament. I think it might have been much more cost effective.
Thank you very much. So I think we'll head back to the panel and let them answer that round of questions, and then I'll come back to the floor. Who would like to start? Anyone in particular? Everyone's looking at Tom.
A few comments. I admit that the Nuclear Security Summit process did not solve all problems of nuclear security. It didn't solve all problems of disarmament. It didn't contribute to a cure for cancer. There's a lot of things it didn't do. But I think it met its goals much better than the vast majority of efforts that have been made in international organizations on other topics, precisely because it harnessed the energy of a large group of nations on a problem shared by a large group of nations, and whose solutions, or at least partial solutions, were within the hands of a large group of nations. Problems that could actually be solved by common cooperative action. I don't think disarmament is the same at all. I think we could get 50 heads of state together in a room, and only 6 or 7 of them matter. I mean no disrespect to the other 43 heads of state who might be in that room. But disarmament does not, has not, and in my view cannot proceed in that matter. I like the whole world being involved and talking about disarmament. But I also like them talking realistically about what can be achieved. I don't know if a nuclear security convention is a good idea or not. There's a lot of diplomats in this room. All of us love conventions. We love the process of negotiating conventions. It's what we do. If it didn't exist, we wouldn't get paid for doing anything. But let's also be realistic about some agreements. For a number of topics, the world pats itself on the back when it gets an agreement and immediately turns to the job of creating a multinational framework and secretariat for the agreement. And not nearly enough is done by countries, by states, to implement national obligations they have undertaken. Virtually every one of these agreements is about national obligations, as Werner pointed out, not about creating a multinational global enforcement mechanism. Not to bring in the topic of another discussion here, but this is the Arms Trade Treaty at the moment. Enormous focus on creating the Secretariat and a global implementation mechanism for a treaty that very explicitly in the treaty says this is the job of national governments to implement. There's nothing in the Arms Trade Treaty that is required that was beyond the capability of countries before the Arms Trade Treaty was created. Every country in the world, including those who advocated for the Arms Trade Treaty, could have done all the steps in that treaty as the U.S., the European Union, and a number of other countries have done. And some of them today, to be fair, are doing it. It's the same thing with the Convention on Nuclear Security. There is nothing in a Convention on Nuclear Security that is likely to be agreed that cannot be done today if a country is determined to do it. And I submit to you that the summit process proved more effective than negotiation of a convention, a global convention on nuclear security, no matter how much employment it would have provided for all of us for the 5, 6, 10 years it takes to negotiate. It would not have had the same effect as this summit process had in mobilizing the states that had the most at stake and the greatest responsibility to do it. I'm not opposed to a nuclear security convention. I am concerned that the negotiation of the convention will be a distraction from doing the actual hard, expensive, physical work of nuclear security. Just on Angela's question, the very short answer, and I know it's not totally satisfactory, yes, of course, we want all states, including those that were not invited to participate in this process, to take the same steps. The vast majority of countries that are not involved do not have the same urgency to take these steps as those that have been involved. Moving this into organizations that have more universal participation, the United Nations, the IAEA, the Global Initiative to Combat Nuclear Terrorism, is one means to do this. But again, there is no enforcement mechanism. There is an obligation on the part of world leaders and on the part of civil society to continue to shine the light on those countries that can and must do more about their own nuclear security.
Thank you very much. Ambassador Bauwens.
Jacek, the Nuclear Security Convention may be a good idea in theory, but very difficult to achieve. We have, I believe, quite an impressive number of conventions already in place. My advice would be to all of us, those who haven't done yet, to ratify those conventions, and we'll see after that. So the ratification processes in certain countries are well underway. I really would like to congratulate our American friends for finally having ratified the amended CPPNM, which I guess, again, whether we would have the summit process or not, one day eventually would have happened. But I believe it's fair to say that having the summit and having the Washington summit next year on American soil probably will have helped along the process. So all credit to that as well. It's good to have coherence when it comes to, I've said it myself actually, when it comes to nuclear security. But we must remain realistic and try to present, digestible pieces for progress. My best guess is that the Nuclear Security Convention will create a lot of stomach pain here and there. So first things first, ratify the existing international legal instruments. It's extremely important that we achieve as quickly as possible a global level playing field. It's not for the good of universality. I believe it is essential in terms of efficiency and credibility of what we all are doing with regard to nuclear security. And one day, eventually, we'll get to a higher stage of getting everyone on board, on the same page, but we're not yet there. At the meantime, there's a lot of work that needs to be done. Angela, as always, a very intriguing question about mainstreaming in the future, how to guarantee this within the agency. I'm a big fan of the agency, having sat on the board for many years. frankly speaking, and I don't want to upset anyone in the room, it may turn out to be basically a question about building confidence by reinforcing transparency. What I'm saying now is certainly not on the record. But even within the EU, we had a number of EU friends and partners, very close friends, who, having not been invited to the nuclear security summits, started putting into question certain lines for EU communiques, which we believed were the most logical things to say without any question. Yet there was this sort of obstacle because we have not been involved. We have a problem with it. So it becomes a problem. Let's face it. It is a problem. And not just for Iran, I see my good friend here, but many other countries within the agency as well. So we need to invest now, really invest now, into building bridges, increasing transparency, build up trust. This said, again, I'm honest, there is no such thing as a secret deal within the nuclear security summit process or a hidden agenda. Everything is pretty much out in the open. Read the website. Fortunately, we have them. All of the material is there. When we do the repatriation of HEU and plutonium to the US, we have an official public communique. So what is there to hide? Nothing. So it's simply too easy an argument to say that, well, we don't want to have to do anything with it because we don't know. You bloody well know what is happening within the nuclear security summit environment. But the question is, we need to give ourselves, all of ourselves, time, to build those bridges. My hope is we can do that fairly quickly. And let's try to profit from the very first occasion within the agency at political level to get things launched within the agency itself. I'll stop here.
Very quick points, because some of the issues have been addressed, but I may look differently on the issue of the Nuclear Security Convention. On the one hand, we all would have liked to have many of the treaties that many of us think very important and would address a number of the issues. But it's no wonder that in the last 20 years, we've resorted to many of these multilateral, plurilateral mechanisms, be it the Global Initiative to Combat Nuclear Terrorism, or even the summit process. Our ability to reach agreement and even start negotiations on any treaties lately has been really hard, if non-existent. In many areas. In this regard, the ATT is probably one of the exclusions. I would, even though many of would like to share it and have a convention, but there is zero practically chance for something to be negotiated in the foreseeable future. It would be just stalled and left for years. Look at the ratification of the amendment to the CPPNM. Even with the 5 years of nuclear security summits trying to gain the necessary signatures, the ratification, for the entry into the force. We haven't done so. Look at the CTBT, we're still not there. How many? 20 years we'll be celebrating next year. So I'm on these grounds, I'm kind of skeptical. And that's one of the reasons in the international mechanisms dealing with nuclear issues, we are resorting more and more to these arrangements. Let's get a coalition of willing or something else to deal with these issues. So I would put it as a food for thought in general. Okay.
Okay, thank you. So I'm looking at my watch, and we have 5 to 10 minutes left, 10 potentially pushing it, and I have 8 people on my list. So if I can ask for brevity and clarity as much as possible, and then we can come back to the panel. First on my list is Ambassador Sultanay.
Well, thank you. I try to be very brief. First of all, I think the message was here very clear, and I want to say that since I've been very much involved in this matter in Vienna, the exclusive approach is what we have to do it, to see it that as this was creating a lot of problems, and by excluding many countries, in fact, from this global concern, that was a mistake. And we tried in Vienna, myself and others, to put everything right track, and we had 6 months working ambassadors, and we had that declaration on ministerial, and we put everything on the IAEA umbrella, under the umbrella, and we should not lose that track. Therefore, this is a great potential that everybody with the inclusive approach is involved, and therefore, rather than continuing this sort of summits again, that I'm sure they're losing gradually the momentum also, it's better to put all energy on the IAEA, support IAEA. The other issue is regarding HU. We have to be very realistic. The main concern of HU is in the nuclear weapon states. Talking about HUs of small reactors, I talked about this matter in Norway in Oslo, when this issue was raised. It is nobody could imagine a terrorist come in the research reactor and take the the HEU of the fuel which is running. It would be immediately killed. It's impossible. What we're talking about. It is not purely HEU stock. It's a safe summit. Therefore, they forced to bring the HEU, all the reactors, and they spend a lot of money. They made a publicity, but nobody understood that this is meaningless. This is nothing in comparing to the real threat of HEU of weapon states, in the weapon states, and therefore this is nothing else. Regarding the plutonium, I remember in the 80s in IAEA we were talking about international plutonium storage. We have to think about something regarding the potential threat of plutonium also in that regard. Having said so, I want to say that I have, of course, a text of resolution of IAEA that we work out, and this was a successful. Even we refer to the non-aligned movement. It means we're bringing all the countries, even the institutions like NAM, to be committed to this important issue of nuclear security. In a nutshell, I think hopefully this summit will be the last. Let's put all energy all together to bring all countries on board. Even those countries, it was mentioned by Mr. Countryman, that might not have any nuclear installations, but there is a potential threat of terrorist activities in anywhere. Therefore, we have to bring everybody on board. This is my suggestion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Manpreet Sethi.
My name is Manpreet Sethi from the Center for Air Power Studies in New Delhi. I really enjoyed the 3 presentations, and I'm quite in agreement with you on the question of achievements. I think each one has listed out what everybody here would agree. On challenges, while I agree with the challenges that you've listed out, I think one that is missing is the breakdown of big power consensus on this issue of nuclear security. We've heard Russia is not participating in the next nuclear security summit. With this dissipation of the international environment, isn't that going to be what will lead to diffusion of the momentum that has been created at the Nuclear Security Summit? And lastly, on the issue of the mechanisms that we need to find in the future, I think we have to find them very carefully. And I would put my weight behind the IAEA as the organization which has the largest amount of membership, universality, acceptability, rather than the NPT, which will again bring us back to a lot of divisive issues. Thank you.
Thank you. And the gentleman next to you.
Thank you very much. Jacek Savage, Deputy Head of Mission of Poland in Vienna. And first of all, just Werner is absolutely right. According to the recent FIFA rankings, Belgium team is the #1 team in the world. That's true, regardless, of course, the reputation of FIFA of today. And and as a former coach of the Foreign Ministry of Poland team, as far as football is concerned, I very much congratulate you and the Belgian football team as well. Which of course goes for this tremendous achievements, which goes hand in hand with the achievements of Belgium with regard to their implementation of the Nuclear Security Summit decisions. And now a more serious question, and Elena has mentioned it already in her intervention. For the second consecutive year, the IAEA resolution on nuclear security fails to make a reference to the Nuclear Security Summit in its text. It was feasible and possible 3 years ago and 4 years ago, even with the presence of Ambassador Soltanius in the room in Vienna. And even during the more complex situation at that time and today, even once we got at hand the deal of 14th of July, it was not possible and feasible whatsoever. And this maybe there is of course, Werner has mentioned rightly, then there is something in a transparency of the Nuclear Security Summit invitation for the membership of the attendance of the summit. Maybe there is also it's a kind of truth. So therefore, IEA as I believe the most pertinent organization among those five, equipped with every possible technical and political tool, should be also equipped in the every possible political leverage, in order to implement the NSS action plans. Therefore, just my question would be, what would be just possible and feasible to do to return for the right track of the IEA to include the Nuclear Security Summit in its political decisions? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Pierre Goldschmidt.
Pierre Goldschmidt, Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. Thank you. Elena, you mentioned, I think, the Trilateral Initiative, which is the issue of disposing of huge excess of plutonium from weapons in Russia and the US. I thought that all the legal and technical issues had been resolved 10 years ago. So why hasn't it been implemented yet? Thank you.
Bill Potter.
Thank you very much. Bill Potter from Monterey. An observation and a question. I think we tend to exaggerate the technical obstacles to HEU minimization. The same conference that Ali Saltani made reference to in Oslo was a two-part conference. The first part, which involved the technical experts, reached a consensus document rather readily. And these were scientists from Russia, from Germany, from South Africa, as well as the US and elsewhere. It was only when the second part of the conference began and the political figures arrived that the consensus evaporated. And while I don't discount some of the technical obstacles, I think they are not the principal ones to moving forward with respect to HEU elimination and certainly HEU minimization. But my question is to you, Tom. We talk a lot about rad sources, dangers of radioactive dispersal devices and the like, and yet we tend not to recall that back in 1979 there was a draft joint treaty, a U.S.-Soviet treaty, dealing with the prohibition of radiological weapons. And so I'm curious whether anyone today recalls that draft treaty and whether there might be some sense in dusting off a treaty which the United States and the Soviet Union found common ground on even during a time when there was the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, whether there might be some merit in looking at that treaty and to see whether or not there were elements of that treaty that merit attention today.
Thank you, Benjamin. And then I have to close the list with Jonathan as the final question.
Thank you very much. Well, I had Benjamin Haute Couverture, Fondation pour la Recherche Stratégique, Paris. I had three questions, but I will focus on the first one, I swear, which is the more specific. Thanks. Would you recommend that nuclear security issues be part of the nuclear suppliers group agenda more than they have been so far, and if so, in which way? Because INFCIRC 225 Rev 5 was declared, I think, something like document of reference at the Prague summit in 2000, the Prague annual meeting in 2013. But what for, and what else? Thank you.
And finally, Jonathan Herbach.
Yes, Jonathan Herbach from the University of Amsterdam. I just wanted to pick up actually on something that Mr. Countryman said before, which I think is a part of the puzzle that gets overlooked sometimes, and that's the extra step of not only commitment making, but then actually fulfilling commitments and implementing the commitments nationally. And I guess my question is, in the context of the NSS, states have submitted national progress reports, so it's been quite easy to kind of see how they've been fulfilling commitments. Once the process ends, we won't have that anymore. And there are commitments that are ongoing that haven't just been fulfilled by this point. So the question is, even beyond that, how will we know whether or not states are fulfilling the commitments that they've made, and how will there, is it possible to kind of increase that transparency to ensure that states are fulfilling their commitments? Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to come back to the panel. They can pick and choose whichever issues they wish to address. If I reverse the order this time, start with Elena.
Can pick and choose. That's good. Okay, I'll start from some of the directly addressed to me, the trilateral initiative. I may have confused people around the room. There are two different trilateral initiatives. The one that you referred to, it relates to indeed to the verification and disposition of fissile materials that U.S., Russia, and the IAEA, and Laura is here, can run the entire panel on this issue. But that's a different subject, although I think it's still relevant even for the nuclear security agenda, because it would have put aside the excess material and verified it and would have it inspected. So its accountancy and control would be much more improved. The name Trilateral Initiative in the Nuclear Security Summit context means the initiative of the three hosts of the Nuclear Security Summits, U.S., the Netherlands, and South Korea, with the initiative that involves now 35 countries that subscribe to the IAEA guidelines. So sorry if I confused you a little bit. On the IAEA versus NPT, I never alluded to, I don't think anyone here alluded to, it's either or. It has to be, with all the context. But I do agree the IAEA is much better forum to address it. It's many of the issues that are related to nuclear security, they cut across of a broader agenda, and they need to be discussed within the NPT context, and not only in the peaceful uses, I would put it this way. Then breakdown of consensus, Russia is not participating. Of course, it's a very unfortunate, and would certainly not help with reaching consensus on some of these big issues. The ones that I alluded, we haven't really dealt with that. But to be frank, I don't think there was much progress in terms of even real commitments and reporting that Russia made during the previous sessions. For many of people who follow it, it was never particularly excited about the Nuclear Security Summit, to put it mildly, and it used that as an excuse, some of the recent developments. On referring back to what you, Ambassador Soltanier, mentioned on, yes, I do agree that the nuclear weapon states need and have to do more, just because of the sheer size of their holdings. And but I also see in your own also comments a little bit of a contradiction. It's like everybody needs to agree to do it, and it's wherever we can make a progress, whether it's 2 kilos at one research reactor, or it's 20 tons in the excess material, that all is important, and it goes towards the same goal. There were a number of other issues. Maybe I'll come back to them. I'll let the others.
30-second clarification.
20 seconds.
30 seconds. Please understand what I'm talking about, because this question was addressed to me by one of the diplomats. Can a terrorist come to a research reactor, take the high-enriched uranium? I said he would be killed in a matter of seconds. We are talking about high-enriched uranium in nuclear weapons. That could be taken, yes. But
in the research reactor, as soon as the reactor starts, there's a fission fragments that there's a huge amount of radiation that nobody could touch it, and it's not usable. Everybody knows, technically. Therefore, we are exaggerating something, diplomats, that technical people do not understand what we're talking about. That's what I'm saying. Unless otherwise, you have high-enriched uranium for a research reactor, which is usually 5 or 6 kilograms, for example. They are carrying out to put it in the core. Before getting at the core, a terrorist come and pick it up. Yes, that is another matter. But if they try to convince and put money for research reactors which are going on running, to change that fuel to make it to LU from HU, which is meaningless. Just wasted the money and the time. And they exaggerate it as if that they have done a great job. This is nothing. That is what I'm saying. Therefore, this is technically what I want to explain. But of course, we can discuss later on because the chair is staring at me and therefore I will not continue.
Can I suggest you continue this over dinner or at the reception? Is that okay? And
I tend to disagree.
That's a great summary. Moving next down the line.
Yeah. Well, Ali, I believe you're right on one and wrong on the other. On the one, you're right, and I agree with. I believe it's high time that we do the outreach to the non-nuclear security summit participants. As I said before, I believe that the IAEA is probably the best place to do that outreach and to make further progress. On the second point, where you say that, when talking about HU repatriation, we're basically looking at peanuts. I tend to disagree on that one. My fundamental view is that everyone who can contribute to reinforcing nuclear security, at whatever level of scope that can be, should do it. So when we are called upon, rightly so, because we have this stuff on our soil, to make an effort, we'll do it. Even if it's only but 1% of the total size of the problem, we will have done our 1% and we'll feel happy and proud about it, and it's a true contribution. On the question from our colleague from India, I don't have the note here with me, but I do recall that our Russian friend Sperdenikov, with whom we've been working for many years very constructively, the Russian note did say that in their view, that is now about 2 years ago, or less than that, they believed that they had reached some sort of a ceiling on what can or should be done in that environment. So I do not really consider, you may believe that this is diplomatic speech, and probably it is, but I do not consider this to be like ruining the drive behind the nuclear security process. It is one judgment from one very important state around the table, but it's argumented, and we have to live with it. The bridge with actually I used the term building bridges between the agency and the NPT on nuclear security issues, I believe is still a valid point, because nuclear security issues are having, lines leading to both proliferation issues as well as civilian uses issues, and thus they do belong automatically, in my view, within on the NPT agenda. So we should not cut some sort of or build some sort of artificial wall between the two. There must be an ongoing process of exchange between the agency, what it is doing on nuclear security on the one hand, and the NPT on the other hand, recognizing that 3 states are still not part of the NPT, which we personally and officially do regret. Bill. Good, Bill. Can you give me your card, and I'll send it to our National Nuclear Research Center. They'll be happy to get your technical advice about, how easy this is being done, the conversion or the minimization. I'm looking forward to the quick result. Thank you. The question on the NSG is Benjamin, it's intriguing. I haven't been thinking about it, actually. So I'm learning here, which is good. Yes, INFCIRC 225 was mentioned, but look at the NSG political context as well. I've been going to NSG plenaries for quite a number of years. There is this sort of easygoing tendency of, getting into your concluding whatever consensual document of the NSG plenary, references to issues of the day. And so I believe, yeah, it is there, the reference, but I believe it is not there to be seen as an issue of export control. It is a broad reference to a broad political issue related to nuclear security, and because nuclear, it is also relevant to the nuclear suppliers group. The discussion about, looking at the state of play of one given country within the area of nuclear security assurances, so to say, being linked to export control conditions is, I believe, a pretty complex issue. I'm not saying that we would not be willing to look into that, but I'm saying just that it's not going to happen overnight. So I'm not quite sure whether it was meant to be operational or rather a broad political reference to the issue. Lastly, our friend from the University of Amsterdam, nice to have you here. It allows me to mention one word which maybe we haven't used up till now, and I still believe it's quite vital on the whole discussion. It's accountability. And you did mention progress reports, and some people around the table within the Nuclear Security Summit do have a problem with the notion itself of progress reports. Like there is something like an international guillotine hanging over your head, and if you don't behave, it's going to fall down. That is actually not the case. There is peer pressure, yes, sure, but that we have everywhere, even in this room. There is kind advice, there is best practices, but there is not something as, any given international body telling you what to do when it comes to securing, your nuclear facilities. You do it because it's part and parcel of your national sovereignty and your national responsibility. You undoubtedly may and will be held by agreements you conclude at the international or European level, undoubtedly. But you are the ones responsible for doing it. When it comes then to accountability, it's not an invention. It is a real problem about confidentiality of the information. There are simply a number of issues that you do not publicly communicate about because they do touch vital security issues. It's a problem, yes, but sorry, it is there. So that is where you have a bit of a split on the issue of, to what level should we go with accountability and where should we stop taking into account confidentiality, which is as vital to secure nuclear material as well. Thank you.
Tom, the last word.
Briefly, the answer to your question, Bill, is no. No one except you remembers a 1979 draft convention on nuclear weapons. Maybe it's worth looking at again, but my off-the-cuff reply is I don't think the problem is state-sponsored development of radiological weapons. As a military weapon, radiological weapons are pretty crappy. As a terrorist weapon, they can be pretty good, and they're 100,000 times easier to build than an improvised nuclear explosive. Now, that's just my first reaction. On the NSG, I agree with Werner that, I haven't thought about the NSG as a mechanism for nuclear security, and I think there's two reasons for that. One is that the raison d'etre of the NSG was non-proliferation concerns and not nuclear security or commercial or civil nuclear cooperation, but specific non-proliferation concerns. And second, nuclear security is actually more about processes, procedures, habits, states of mind than it is about technology. On Russia, it is unfortunate that Moscow has made a political decision not to attend. The door is open in case the political situation changes and they wish to attend. They will, of course, be welcome. It's unfortunate in particular because for more than 20 years, the United States and Russia worked together closely to secure the stockpiles of fissile material, which are greater within the borders of the Russian Federation than in any other country on earth. And I think it's unfortunate that Russian non-participation will cause us to lose the transparency that gave us more confidence that these stocks were well secured. That's too bad. I don't think it undermines the process overall, but it is certainly a limitation. On plutonium management, legal and technical issues resolved. Legal, yes. Technical and economic, no. And how do we continue to monitor commitments that each country makes? Well, we do it the old-fashioned American way. We nag people. We get in their face and annoy them and ask them how they're doing. We write national implementation reports ourselves that we expect our partners to critique. Our partners, both in other governments and in civil society, can critique our reports on how we're doing on nuclear security, but we're sure as hell going to do the same for our friends around the world. Now, it is a fact that perhaps that nagging will no longer be done at the presidential level and will be left to bureaucrats like me. But the mechanism will still be there, and we expect that people who have participated seriously up till now will continue to meet the commitments they've made, and they know that there are both international mechanisms and bilateral assistance from the United States, the EU, and others that can assist them in doing that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tom. We have overrun a tad. Apologies for that, but I think you'll all agree it was worth it to hear the speakers speak very honestly and transparently about the process. So please join me in thanking our three panelists.